jolly and bright with a happy song. Beep, beep, carload of fun, full of games and jokes and joy. Hours of fun for every girl and boy. Beep, beep, here comes the car. Listen now and you will hear. Beep, beep, carload of fun, stories full of smiles and cheer. Beep, beep, carload of fun, tales to make you laugh and grin. Quiet now as we begin. Beep, beep, here comes the car. Make way for the fun-filled car. Beep, beep, on its way. It's driving in from afar with laughter and games and jokes and songs for each day. Clap, clap, you're the star. Beep, beep, here comes the car. Clap, clap, you're the star. Beep, beep, here comes the car. Clap, clap, you're the star. Beep, beep, here comes the car. Clap, clap, you're the star. Beep, beep.
3 wishes. Once upon a time, there was a poor fisherman who lived with his wife in a humble cottage at the edge of a wood. Every day, the husband would go to the river to fish and manage to catch just enough to keep them alive. The wife grew a few vegetables, but there was rarely any food left at the end of the day. They lived simply, a meager existence. Many nights they sat and talked and wished that they had some of the good things they had heard about. One day, while sitting at the river fishing and catching only 3 small bony fish, he sighed out loud. "Oh, this is such a hard life. I fish all day long and my wife works in her vegetable patch, and still we're always so poor. How I wish I could hope for some more things in life." And as he spoke the words, a golden fish jumped out of the water and stood on its tail before him. "I have heard your wish," said the fish, "and I will grant you 3 wishes. Choose wisely, for you may have only 3. And the fish dove down and disappeared. "Am I dreaming?" said the man to himself. But he hurried home early and told his wife what had happened. "Oh, if only it were really true," she said. "Imagine, we could have anything we wanted, anything at all. Yes, we could have all the fish we need, or a fine house. Oh, not just a house, a palace." And they went on talking and imagining what they wanted, but they couldn't come to any decision. So they ate their meager meal and decided to wait for the morrow to talk again. In the morning, the wife set out before him a thin bowl of fish soup, mostly water, which was all she had. And he looked at it and sighed. "Oh dear, fish broth again. Oh, how I wish for once to have a nice fat sausage for breakfast." And, wonder of wonder, there on the table in front of him was a juicy, plump sausage. "Oh, see what you've done," said his wife. "You've wasted 1 wish on a silly sausage. Now we only have 2 left. Oh!" "Well, still, I have 2 more," he said. But his wife scolded and scolded him. "Oh," she kept saying, "you've wasted a perfectly good wish. We can never get it back again. Oh, you're such a fool. Oh, woe is me to be married to such a fool. How could you do it on just a sausage?" And on she went, on and on in this manner, and finally he lost his temper. "I'm tired of hearing about that sausage." "Quiet," I said. "I'm tired of your constant complaining. I wish that sausage were stuck to your nose." And it was. No sooner were the words out of his mouth than the sausage was hanging at the end of the wife's nose. "Oh, see what you've done," said the wife. "You've wasted another wish." And she tried to pull the sausage off, but she couldn't. And he took hold of it and tried to pull it off, but he couldn't. It was stuck there, hanging there, at the end of her nose. Everybody could see it. Oh, well, said the man, we still have one wish left. We can wish for gold, a lot of gold. What good will gold do me if I have to spend the rest of my life with this sausage hanging from the end of my nose? Everyone will laugh at me. There's only one thing to do, wish it off again. But then we will be as poor as we were to start with. Yes, that's what I wish for, said the wife. And immediately the sausage was gone. And so the 3 wishes had been granted. And they were as poor as they had ever been. No better, no worse. And thus they lived out their lives in their humble cottage at the edge of the wood.
Pecos Bill. Once upon a time, out in the far west, there was a famous cowboy named Pecos Bill. They say Bill was born in Texas in a little house in the prairie, far away from other people. For hundreds of miles around, there was only Pecos Bill, his mommy, his daddy, his 2 sisters, and his 2 brothers. One day, some settlers built a house about 50 miles from Bill's house. "Shucks," said his daddy, "getting mighty crowded around here, let's move on." So his parents packed the old wagon, hitched up the horses, and off they went. But as they crossed a little river, the wagon hit a rock, and out bounced Bill. Everybody was sleeping, and they didn't even notice that he was gone. Bill would have drowned, but an old coyote saw him and pulled him to safety. Bill stayed with the coyotes while he was growing up. He learned to run with a pack and howl at the moon. He thought he was a coyote himself. One day, a cowboy came riding by and saw Bill. "Hey, you," he said, "where are your clothes?" "Clothes?" said Bill. "Coyotes don't wear clothes." "If you're a coyote, where's your tail?" laughed the cowboy. And that's how Bill discovered he wasn't a coyote. He went off with a cowboy, Curly Joe, who loaned him some clothes. As the cowboy was riding with Bill walking next to him, a 12-foot rattlesnake struck out from behind a rock and sank its fangs in Bill's legs. Bill just grabbed that rattlesnake and squeezed it and squeezed it. "Hiss," said the rattlesnake, "I'm beat." Bill just twisted that snake into a loop. He twirled it around his head and threw the loop round a lizard that was sunning on a rock. And that is how Pecos Bill invented the lasso. As Bill and his cowboy friend Curly Joe traveled on, a mountain lion leaped from a ledge onto Bill's back. Bill and the lion rolled on the ground, and they fought and they wrestled, and Bill pulled out a handful after handful of the mountain lion's fur. "Stop, stop," growled the lion. "I give up." "Okay," said Bill, and he jumped on the lion, and the lion ran off, leaving Curly Joe far behind. But later that day, Curly Joe said to Bill, "Shucks, Mountain Lion ain't right for a regular cowboy. You need a horse." "Sure do," agreed Bill. "I heard of a wild Mustang that nobody can catch. I aim to get him." Bill tracked that Mustang from Texas to Montana and back. In Colorado, that Mustang stopped to get a drink of water. Bill said, "You sure are the fastest horse in the world, and I'm the greatest cowboy. Let's team up." And they did. And there was nobody in the world who could keep up with Bill and his great yellow Mustang when they went speeding by. One day a tornado came howling through the west. Bill heard it coming. He climbed a big tree and waited. The tornado pulled up trees, wagons, cattle, houses, and even a steam engine were whirling around in it. Bill crept up and out onto the tornado's back. He hung on tightly. "Yippee!" he shouted. "What a ride!" He rode the tornadoes back through Mexico, Arizona, and Colorado. Fast and high across the country, the wind blew down great forests. It leveled mountains, it flooded rivers, but it couldn't throw Bill. When he got tired of the ride, he slid down a flash of lightning and landed with a hard bump. The earth cracked, and that's how we got the Grand Canyon. Out west, they still tell stories around the campfire at night of Pecos Bill, the greatest cowboy of all time.
A Silly Adventure in the Woods. Marta was a little girl who lived with her mother in a little house at the edge of the forest. "Don't go into the woods, Marta," her mother always told her. "There's a witch there, folks say. Don't go beyond the 3-branch tree." And up to now, Marta had always obeyed. But on this day, when her mother left to gather some wood and said as usual, "Don't go into the woods, Marta. Don't go beyond the 3-branch tree," Marta forgot. She was following a lovely yellow bird, and suddenly, without realizing it, she found herself deep in the woods, in a place she had never seen before. The yellow bird flew away, and Marta looked around her. There was no sun there, and she didn't know which path led back to her home. And then she heard a voice saying, "Aha, my little one, I've been waiting for a little girl like you. Come along, help me carry my plants and pickings." It was the witch. "Come with me." And she took Marta's arm and dragged her deeper into the woods. "You must help me gather wild mushrooms and herbs for my secret soup. Come on." Meanwhile, back at the witch's hut, a bear came in, and he began to turn around and around. And as he was turning around and around, a dog came up and asked him, "Bear, why are you turning around like that?" "What difference does it make?" said the bear. "Why don't you turn too?" Then both of them turned around and around and around. And as they were turning around, along came a rooster and said, "Hey, bear! Hey, dog! Why are you turning around like that?" They said, "What difference does it make? Why don't you turn too?" So all 3 of them turned around, and as they were turning, along came a teapot cover and said, "Hey, bear and dog and rooster, why are you turning around like that?" And they said, "What difference does it make? Why don't you turn too?" So all 4 of them turned around and around and around and around, and as they were turning, along came some tar and a needle. And they said, "Hey, bear, dog, rooster, and teapot cover, why are you turning around like that?" And they all said, "What difference does it make? Why don't you turn too?" So all 6 of them turned around and 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 around. And then they got tired, and they wanted to go to sleep. So the bear lay down in the old witch's bed. The dog lay down on the couch. The rooster lay on the mantelpiece. The teapot cover on the stove. The bit of tar inside a box of matches. And the needle stuck himself into a dish towel. Finally, the witch came back with the little girl. The witch said she wanted to go to sleep, so she went to her bed, and the bear kicked her out. "That's strange," she said. Then she lay on her couch, but the dog bit her. "Ouch! Ow! What's going on here?" Next, she went over to the stove to warm herself and think. But the teapot cover fell off the mantelpiece and struck her hand. Frightened, she cried out, "Oh, there must be another witch here. That's frightening me." and she tried to light the lamp to see what was happening. She opened the matchbox to light a match, but the tar stuck to her fingertips, and she couldn't shake it off. So she washed her hands to get rid of it. Then she reached for the towel, but the needle stuck her hard, and she began to yell. The rooster, hearing her, woke up and said, "You don't scare me!" When the witch heard that, she grabbed her broomstick and rode off so fast she was never heard of again. And all the animals turned around and around and took Marta back to her mother's house. And Marta didn't go beyond the 3-branch tree for a long, long time.
Talk. A long time ago in West Africa, there lived a farmer, and he was out in his fields digging up one of his yams to boil and eat for dinner. His shovel nicked the edge of the yam, and the yam said, "What are you doing out here? You never weed me, you never water me, and now you want to dig me up and boil me and eat me for dinner. Go away, and leave me alone." The man was astonished. He didn't know who was doing the talking. He looked at his cow, who was standing nearby, and said, "Did you say something?" His dog said, No, that wasn't the cow. That was the yam. The yam says leave him alone, so leave him alone." Well, the man had never heard his dog talk before, and he was astonished, but he certainly didn't like what the dog was saying, so he went to the nearby palm tree to cut a branch to beat the dog with. When he did that, the palm tree said, "Hey, man, put that branch down." So the farmer dropped the branch on the ground. When he did, the branch said, "Put me down softly." So he picked up the branch very carefully and put it down ever so gently on a stone, and the stone said, "Hey, take that thing off me." Well, this was too much for the man, and he began running as fast as his legs could carry him. On the way, he met his friend, a fisherman, who had a fish trap balanced on his head. "What's the matter?" said the fisherman. "You look like you've seen a zombie." "Oh, no, it's not that," said the farmer. "The yam said, 'Leave me alone.' The dog said, 'Listen to your yam.' The tree said, 'Put the branch down.' The branch said, 'Put it down softly.' And the stone said, 'Take that thing off me.'" "Well," said the friend, "I don't think that's anything to get excited about." When suddenly the fish trap, balanced on the fisherman's head, said, "Well, did he take it off the stone?" said the fisherman, and he threw the fish trap down on the ground and began running with his friend the farmer. They ran as fast as their legs could carry them, and they met their friend, the weaver, who was carrying a bundle of cloth on his head. "Now, what's the matter?" said the weaver. "You look like you're going to enter the races in the capital or something." "Oh, no, said the farmer. "My yam said leave me alone. My dog said listen to your yam. The tree said put the branch down. The branch said put me down softly. And the stone said take that thing off me." "Yes, and the fish trap said did he take it off?" said the fisherman. "Well, I don't see why I'd get excited about that," said the weaver. "Well," said the bundle of cloth on the weaver's head, "if it happened to you, you'd run too." All three of them said, and the weaver threw the cloth down on the ground and began running with his friends. Pretty soon they met their friend, who was bathing in the river that they were about to cross. The man in the river said, "Hey, where are you going? Where are you going? I think a hyena must be chasing you, you're running so fast." "Oh, no, said the man. "The yam said leave me alone. My dog said listen to your yam. The tree said put the branch down. The branch said put me down softly. And the stone said take that thing off me." "Yes," said the fisherman. "Then the fish trap said did he take it off?" "Yes," said the weaver, "and the bundle of cloth said you'd run too." "Well," said the man in the river, "I don't think that's anything to get excited about. I certainly wouldn't if all of that happened." And then suddenly the river said, "Oh, yeah? Well, I'd do the same thing if I were in their position." Said the man in the river, and he ran out of it without even putting on his clothes. And now all 4 men were running towards the house of the village chief. "Wait a minute," said the chief when he saw them coming. "Stop running so fast. Let my servant get my stool that I use for judging matters on, and I'll sit down on it, and you can count to 10 and tell me what happened." 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Oh, never mind. My yam said, "Leave me alone." My dog said, "Listen to your yam." The tree said, "Put the branch down." The branch said, "Put me down softly." And the stone said, "Take that thing off me." "Yes," said the fisherman. Then the fish trap said, "Did he take it off?" And the bundle of cloth said, "You'd run too," said the weaver. And then the river said just about the same thing, said the man who had been bathing. Said the chief. "Now this is really a crazy story. I have one suggestion, that you all go back to your homes and go back to doing what you were doing before I have you arrested for disturbing the peace." So everyone hung their heads like little boys who'd just been punished and walked back home. Said the chief as he sat down in his stool. "Nonsense like this upsets the community." "Fantastic, isn't it?" said the stool. "Imagine, talking yams."
This is the 3 Sillies. Once upon a time, there lived a farmer and his wife. They had one child, a daughter. A neighbor's son was sweet on her, and he would come to see her often at supper time. The girl would go down to the cellar to draw the beer. One evening, she went down as usual, and she happened to look up at the ceiling while she was turning on the beer tap. And she saw an axe stuck up there on a beam. It had probably been there a long time, but she'd never noticed it before. And she began to worry. And as she worried, she thought, well, that's very dangerous to have an axe up there in the ceiling. Suppose me and my young man was to get married, and we was to have a son, and he was to grow up to be a man and come down to the cellar to draw the beer, like I'm doing now, and the axe was to fall on his head and kill him. How awful that would be! And she put down the beer pail and sat herself down and began to cry. Well, the folks upstairs began to wonder what was keeping her, and her mother went down to see what was the matter. And she found her daughter sitting there crying with the beer running all over the floor. "Why, whatever is the matter?" said her mother. "Oh, Mother, look up at that axe. Suppose him up there and me was to be married, and we was to have a son, and that son would grow up and come down here to get the beer, and that axe was to fall on his head and kill him. What an awful thing it would be." "Oh, yes," said the mother. You're right. It would be awful indeed." And she sat down next to her daughter, and she started to cry. After a while, the father wondered what had happened to the both of them, and he went down to find out. And there they were, a-crying and the beer running out all over the cellar. "Whatever is the matter?" said he. "Well," said the mother, "look at that awful axe. Suppose our daughter and her fella get married, and they have a son, and he comes down here to draw the beer, and the axe falls on his head and kills him. Oh!" "Dear, dear, yes. That would be awful," said the father, and he sat down next to them and started bawling as well. Now at last the boy upstairs got tired of waiting, and he went down to the cellar to see what the matter was, and he saw them there all wailing with the beer running all over the floor. So he went over and turned off the tap, and then he asked them what they were doing, letting the beer run all over the floor. "Oh," said the father, "suppose you two get married and you have a son and he grows up and you send him down in the cellar to draw the beer and that axe up there in the ceiling falls down and kills him. How awful it would be." But the young man burst out laughing, and he reached up and pulled out the axe. And he said, "Well, I've been to many places, and I've never met 3 such sillies as you. And so now I think I shall leave you and go traveling. And if I can ever find 3 bigger sillies anywhere, then I'll come back and I'll marry your daughter." And so he said goodbye and he started off, leaving them all crying, because now she'd lost her sweetheart. Well, he left and he traveled a long way. And one day he came to a cottage with grass growing on the roof. A woman was there trying to get her cow to climb a ladder to the roof, but the cow was afraid and wouldn't go. "Why are you trying to make your cow go up the ladder to the roof?" asked the young man. "Oh, don't you see all that lovely grass? I'm trying to get her up there to go to eat it. I've tied a rope around her neck, so if she'll go up, I'll pull the end down the chimney and tie it around my wrist when I'm in the house, so she can't fall off without my knowing it." "Well, that's pretty silly," said the young man. "Why don't you cut down the grass and throw it down to the cow?" But the woman thought it was easier to do it her way, so she pushed and shoved the cow, and finally got it up to the roof and passed the rope down the chimney, and it was around her wrist. But pretty soon the cow fell off the roof and hung by the rope around her neck, which strangled the cow, and the weight of the cow pulled the woman halfway up into the chimney, and she stuck there. "Well," said the boy, "that's one big silly." And then the young man left, and he went on till he came to an inn. But the inn was so full he had to share a room with another traveler. The other man was nice enough and they talked a bit. But in the morning, while he was getting dressed, the young man was amazed to see his roommate hang his trousers on the footpost of the bed and run across the room to try to jump into them. He tried again and again, but couldn't quite make it. At last he stopped for a minute to wipe his face. Oh, he said, "I do think trousers are the most difficult article of clothing to put on. It takes me an hour every morning. I get so out of breath. How do you manage?" The young man, after he had stopped laughing, showed him. And the stranger thanked him and wondered why he had never thought of it. Well, that was the second silly. The young man went on his way again, and finally he came to a village. And in the village was a pond, and around the pond were a lot of people. And they all were holding rakes and pitchforks and brooms. And the young man asked them what were they doing. "Well," they said, "the moon's fallen into the pond, and we're trying to get it out." And so the young man burst out laughing, and he told them to look up into the sky. "Look," he said, "it's just the moon's reflection in the water." And laughing, he left there, and he left them to their nonsense. Well, that was 3. And so the world was full of sillies, even bigger than those back home. And so the young man set out for home again and married the farmer's daughter. And for all we know, his silly wife kept him laughing for a long and happy time.
It could always be worse. Long, long ago in Europe, there was a very poor man. He had only a small little house, and with him in the house there lived his wife, his 6 children, and their in-laws. Oh, it was too much for him. He went to the local wise man and said, "What am I to do? What am I to do?" "Ah," said the wise man, "it could always be worse." "What do you mean?" "Will you do whatever I say?" said the wise man. "Yes, yes." "All right then, I can show you a way to make you feel that your house is roomy as anything. Do you have any animals?" "Why, yes, I have chickens and a goat and a cow." "Move them all into the house with you," said the wise man. "What? You said you would do whatever I said." "All right," said the poor man. So he moved the animals into the house. He came back to the wise man in a week. "Well, how is it now?" "Awful, awful," said the poor man. "The animals are everywhere. There's no place to move." "Well then, why don't you move the chickens out of the house?" "Oh, certainly," said the poor man, and that's what he did. The poor man came back in a week. "Well, it's a little better now, but the goat is eating the furniture." "Well, why don't you move the goat out of the house?" said the wise man. So he did, and he came back in a week. "Well, how is it now?" said the wise man. "Well, it's a little better, but the cow is turning the house into a stable." "Well, why don't you move the cow out of the house?" "All right," said the poor man, and he came back in a week. "Oh, wise man," he said, "this is wonderful. My house is suddenly so roomy. How could I thank you?" And the wise man said, "Just remember, from now on, when anything is going bad, it could always be worse."
Simple Wang. Long ago in ancient China, in a small village on the far side of many, many rice fields, lived a simple peasant named Wang. The village was so far from any other that no one new ever came to it. The emperor never rode through, no travelers came, no peddlers ever made their way there. So the people who lived there never saw anything modern. They lived a simple and primitive life, raising the food they needed to eat and trading with each other for other necessities. Wang made his living by collecting charcoal from nearby crags and selling or trading it to other villagers. Wang was young and strong and had a new wife, whom he loved dearly. One evening she said, "Wang, husband, perhaps if you could take your charcoal to the city to sell it, you could get more money, and we might be able to have some more things." The city. No one in his village had ever been to the city. Oh, what a bold idea, the city. But Wang loved his little wife, and he didn't want to admit his fear of going so far beyond the long, long rice field, through the mountain pass. Oh, so he agreed to do it. On the morning he was to leave, he woke early, filled his baskets with charcoal, hooked them onto his carrying pole, heaved it up to his shoulders, and started off, his knees quaking. His wife walked with him to the end of the village road, and before she left him, she asked, "Husband, could you perhaps bring me a present?" "Oh, a present. A present. What kind of present?" Wang was so nervous about his journey he couldn't think properly. "A comb," she said. "A comb? And what should it look like?" Well, in those days, in that place, the combs they used were of wood and carved. "Like that," she said, pointing one long finger at the pale crescent moon that shone in the early morning sky. Well, Wang stared at the moon to remember. "The moon," he said, like the moon." And off he went. Now Wang was lucky. No bandits or tigers endangered him, and in a few days he reached the city. And his wife was right. In no time at all he sold all his charcoal, and for a good price. He placed the money under his coat and decided to look around a bit before starting home. Oh, it was a wonder. Hundreds and hundreds of people in the streets. Bright banners flew from the buildings, and the streets were packed with vendors selling marvels he couldn't even have imagined. And as his eyes stared in astonishment, he suddenly remembered his wife had wanted a present. Now, what was it she had asked for? Oh, he couldn't recall. He stared straight ahead of him, thinking thinking, he was looking down the busy street, and at the very end, where it seemed that the buildings came together, there, hanging low in the sky, was the moon. But days had passed, and now the moon was full and bright and round. "The moon," he said, "like the moon. She wants something like the moon." And he turned quickly to a nearby vendor. Do you have something a woman would like that is round like the moon?" "Yes, indeed," said the man, and showed Wang something. It was round as round could be. Wang paid for it without even arguing about the price, wrapped it in a handkerchief, put it under his coat, and set out for home. Well, there were no dangers on his homeward journey either, and in a few more days he reached the dirt road to his village. There at the end, waiting for him excitedly, was his little wife. They hurried together back to their simple hut. Sitting at the edge of the bed, she finally asked him shyly, "And my present? Did you bring me a present?" "I did," he said, "and here it is." And out from under his coat he brought it. He unwrapped it and he gave it to her. Now what Wang had bought was a mirror. He had never seen a mirror before, and no one in his village had ever seen a mirror. She took it. She held it. She examined it. She turned it. And then finally she saw her own reflection in it. She'd never seen her face in a mirror. Oh, my husband has brought home a new wife. For in those days, a man could have more than one wife. And she cried, and she cried, and she cried, and she cried, and she cried. And after a while, she went running over to her mother's house. She threw herself onto her mother's lap. "Look, my husband has brought home a new wife." And she held the mirror up to her mother. Her mother had never seen herself in a mirror before. She looked in the mirror, saw her own reflection. "Oh, if he's brought home a new wife, why did he bring home such an ugly old hag?" And she began to cry and wail. Well, a little boy was walking on the street outside eating a rice cake. He heard all the howling and crying inside and decided to investigate. He went towards the women, saw his reflection in the mirror. He saw a boy holding a rice cake. He raised his hand. The boy in the mirror raised his hand. The little boy thought the boy in the mirror was trying to take his rice cake from him, and he began to yell. Outside, an old man was passing by. He heard all that commotion, and he went inside. He looked in the mirror and saw his own reflection. He heard the boy yelling that someone was trying to take his rice cake. "How dare you, you wicked old man, trying to take a rice cake from a little boy?" And he grabbed the mirror, and it slipped, and it broke into 100 pieces. And that was the end of the mirror, and that was the end of the problem, and that is the end of the story.
The Polka-Dotted Zebra. Once upon a time, deep in the jungles of Africa, lived a lively herd of zebras. All day long they would run across the vast open plains, and their bright striped black and white coats made a beautiful design against the big blue sky. There were big zebras, little zebras, middle-sized zebras, all with brightly striped coats. That is, all except one little zebra. One little zebra was white, with big black polka dots. Big, round, black polka dots. Nobody could understand why that little zebra was different. His mommy was striped. His daddy was striped. His brother was striped. His sister was striped. But he was polka-dotted. "That's all right, son," rumbled the father zebra. "Dots make you very special." "Don't worry, son," said his mother lovingly. "You look just fine. But the little polka-dotted zebra didn't think so. He didn't like being different from all the other zebras. Sometimes they would laugh at him and tease him. Sometimes they would sing, polka dot, whatever you are, a zebra you're not. They were only kidding, but it made the polka-dot zebra feel very bad. Mommy, he said, when I grow up, will I have stripes like the other zebras? Maybe my dots will turn into stripes. I don't know, said his mommy honestly, but in my eyes you are beautiful just the way you are. One day, a rumor swept across the Great Plains. The lions told the tigers, and the tigers told the leopards, and the leopards told the elephants, and the elephants told the zebras. There was to be a great party on the plains. The king and his wife and the princess and princesses and many, many visitors would come to the Great Plain to celebrate the king's birthday. They would stay in large tents, and there would be dancing and singing and feasting. And the greatest moment of all would be a long, wonderful parade of all the animals in the land. The elephants would dance. The monkeys would swing from tree to tree. The gazelles would show their great speed and grace, flying like birds. Even the hippos and rhinos would leave their cool, wet pools to march in the great parade. When he heard about the parade, the polka-dot zebra became sadder than ever. How could he march with all his family? His aunts, his uncles, his cousins. Everybody he knew was striped. But he was polka-dotted. The great king would laugh at him. The polka-dot zebra thought and thought about it. Finally, he made a big decision. He would not march in the great parade. He would run away and hide until the great day was over. Because he was a good little zebra, he scratched a note on a palm leaf so that his parents would not worry. And then, in the dark of night, where only a small sliver of a silver moon made a path of light, he ran off across the empty plain. Far, far away ran the polka-dot zebra, for he was strong and fleet of foot. The next morning, he saw shining in the distance the towers and steeples of the king's city. I will wait, thought the little zebra. By this little stream, there's lots of grass to eat and plenty of water to drink. I can watch the gate to the city, and when the king's party returns from the march, I will go home. Now it happened that the king went out into the plain every morning, riding his famous white horse to view his land lying all about. But as he left the city that morning, his horse was thirsty. Galloping along the plain, he headed for the little stream so that he could drink. And there, lying by the stream, was the little zebra fast asleep. "Why, what is that?" exclaimed the king. "I do declare, it's a polka-dot zebra." Just then, the polka-dot zebra opened his eyes and saw the big white horse with the splendidly noble king. Shakily he got to his legs, his eyes round and frightened. "Do not be afraid, little zebra," said the king. "I would like to be your friend. Come, run along with us as I take my morning ride." And off they went, galloping across the plain, the big white horse with the noble king, and the little polka-dot zebra following as fast as he could. Back at the zebra's home, all the animals were watching with wonderment as the day of the big party approached. There were large tents with brightly colored rugs. There were tables of food with juicy fruits and rich pastries and colorful vegetables. There were jugglers and clowns, magicians and dancers. And then, on the big day, the animals started lining up early in the morning for the king's parade. First came the lordly lions, heads high in the air, the stately elephants, the sleek tigers, the slender jaguars, and all the other animals of the kingdom, stretching from one end of the plains to the other. And then, to the front of the parade came the king. And who was by his side, trotting proudly along? It was none other than the polka-dotted zebra. A roar of amazement soared through the air as the other animals saw him. As the drums beat and the trumpets blew and the king said, "And now I appoint the polka-dot zebra Grand Marshal of the great birthday parade. Let it begin." And high-stepping, head in the air, off marched the polka-dot zebra across the great plain with all the animals of the kingdom marching behind him in the grand parade. And ever after that day, all the little zebras say to their mommies, "Why can't we be polka-dotted too?" And the little polka-dot zebra never wanted to be striped again.
How the whale got his throat. In the sea, once upon a time, oh my best beloved, there was a whale, and he ate fishes. He ate the starfish and the garfish, and the crab and the dab, and the plaice and the dace, and the skate and his mate, and the mackerel and the pickerel, and the really truly twirly-whirly eel. All the fishes he could find in all the sea he ate with his mouth, until at last there was only one small fish left in all the sea, and he was a small 'stute fish, and he swam a little behind the whale's right ear so as to be out of harm's way. Then the whale stood up on his tail, and he said, "I'm hungry." And the small 'stute fish said in a small 'stute voice, "Noble and generous cetacean, have you ever tasted man?" "No," said the whale. "What's it like?" "Nice," said the small 'stute fish. "Nice, but nubbly." "Then fetch me some," said the whale, and he made the sea froth up with his tail. "One at a time is enough," said the 'stute fish. "If you swim to latitude 50 north, longitude 40 west, that is magic. You will find sitting on a raft in the middle of the sea with nothing on but a pair of blue canvas breeches, a pair of suspenders — you must not forget the suspenders, best beloved — and a jackknife. One shipwrecked mariner, who, it is only fair to tell you, is a man of infinite resource and sagacity." And so the whale swam and swam to latitude 50 north, longitude 40 west, as fast as he could swim, and on a raft, in the middle of the sea, with nothing to wear except a pair of blue canvas breeches, a pair of suspenders — you must particularly remember the suspenders, best beloved — and a jackknife, he found one single solitary shipwrecked mariner trailing his toes in the water. He had his mummy's leave to paddle, or else he would never have done it, because he was a man of infinite resource and sagacity. Then the whale opened his mouth, back and back, till it nearly touched his tail, and he swallowed the shipwrecked mariner, and the raft he was sitting on, and his blue canvas breeches, and the suspenders, which you must not forget, and the jackknife. He swallowed them all, down to his warm, dark inside cupboards, and then he smacked his lips. Just so. And he turned round 3 times on his tail. But as soon as the mariner, who was a man of infinite resource and sagacity, found himself truly inside the whale's warm, dark inside cupboards, he stumped and he jumped and he thumped and he bumped and he pranced and he danced and he banged and he clanged and he hit and he bit and he leaped and he creeped and he prowled and he howled and he hopped and he dropped and he cried and he sighed and he crawled and he bawled and he stepped and he leapt and he danced hornpipes where he shouldn't. And the whale felt most unhappy indeed. Have you forgotten the suspenders? So he said to the 'stute fish, "This man is very nubbly, and besides he is making me hiccup. What shall I do?" "Tell him to come out," said the 'stute fish. And so the whale called down his own throat to the shipwrecked mariner, "Come out and behave yourself. I've got the hiccups." "Nay, nay," said the mariner, "not so, but far otherwise. Take me to my natal shore and the white cliffs of Albion, and I'll think about it." And he began to dance more than ever. "You had better take him home," said the 'stute fish to the whale. "I ought to have warned you that he is a man of infinite resource and sagacity." So the whale swam and swam and swam, with both flippers and his tail, as hard as he could for the hiccups. And at last he saw the mariner's natal shore and the white cliffs of Albion. And he rushed halfway up the beach, and he opened his mouth wide, 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 and he said, "Change here for Winchester, Ashalot, Nashua, Keene, and stations on the Fitchburg Road." And just as he said "Fitch," the mariner walked out of his mouth. But while the whale had been swimming, the mariner, who was indeed a person of infinite resource and sagacity, had taken his jackknife and cut up the raft into a little square grating, all running crisscross, and he had tied it firm with his suspenders. Now you know why you weren't to forget the suspenders. And he dragged that grating good and tight into the whale's throat, and there it stuck. And then he recited the following sloka, which, as you have not heard it, I will now proceed to relate. "By means of a grating, I have stopped your ating." For the mariner, he was also a Hibernian. And he stepped out on the shingle and went home to his mother, who had given him leave to trail his toes in the water. And he married and lived happily ever afterward. So did the whale. But from that day on, the grating in his throat, which he could neither cough up nor swallow down, prevented him eating anything except very, very small fish. And this is the reason why whales nowadays never eat men or boys or little girls. The small 'stute fish went out and hid himself in the mud under the door sills of the equator. He was afraid that the whale might be angry with him. The sailor took the jackknife home. He was wearing the blue canvas breeches when he walked out on the shingle. The suspenders were left behind, you see, to tie that grating with. And that is the end of that tale.
Yellow car just rolling along. Beep, beep, carload of fun. Jolly and bright with a happy song. Beep, beep, carload of fun. Full of games and jokes and joy. Hours of fun for every girl and boy. Beep, beep, here comes the car. Make way for the fun-filled car. Beep, beep on its way. It's driving in from afar with laughter